is going to be right on this. Obviously, the president feels he is, and the gap has narrowed a little bit, not only in the president's own numbers that have picked up a little bit, but when you ask the generic question, who would you most want to see in charge of Congress right now? We're not showing it there, but that gap between Democrats and Republicans has narrowed. The narrowest it's been now in this election year cycle this year. So it's still early, but we shall see. Let's get the read from Republican strategist Kimberly Klacik, market watcher Michael Block, and Deirdre Bolton. Michael, to you on the president saying this is a winner for us. Tax cuts are a winner. It's clearly a winner for the markets, a winner for businesses. It's a winner for individuals. And stick with us. It'll be a winner at the polls. What do you think?
He needs to keep hammering home that message, Neil. I mean, we saw it today. The market rallied on this, and voters are going to like a higher stock market. It's not the only thing they look at, but certainly Trump can point to it and say, look, the market is still strong. If the economic data comes in strong, wages, jobs, he could point to that going into November. We're going to hear more and more about that. The fact that he was at this meeting today in Hialeah, he is courting the Latino vote in Florida very directly, saying, I'm here with you. I support your business efforts. I care about you. And that message is going to resonate. You could poke holes in it, but that's the objective here. I think going into November, we're going to hear more about the tax cuts, more about the bright spots of the economic data. The Republicans have to do all they can to keep that going and the message going. We're also going to start hearing more about stimulus. That's been on the back burner. It's going to move to the front burner as the summer ends.
You know, one of the parties is right on this strategy, right? The Democrats are bashing this thing and Republicans for praising it. One of the things you hear in a lot of the studies and the focus groups that Republicans have been sort of debating is using Nancy Pelosi, the crumbs comment, saying that she wants to redo this whole thing, shelve what the Republicans did. How is that resonating?
Well, I think as we get closer to midterms, there's going to be this PR war, right? And we saw in Western Pennsylvania with Connor Lamb, he really pounded the GOP saying this is a tax cut for corporations. This is a tax cut for the rich. Now, granted, that was not a single issue vote, but he won in an area that President Trump had carried by 20 points. So I feel like it is worth certainly keeping on message and bringing up business leaders and saying, okay, this has helped us. We are able to hire. I think as far as the PR goes, the Republicans should very much stay on this. This is certainly one of the big successes of the Trump administration.
Yeah, well, their biggest, you could argue.
Yeah.
Right. Kimberly, and obviously the audience, too, was important, to Michael's point, and reaching out to Hispanics, Cuban Americans, others who can say, look, I benefited from this as well. How is that going to long-term benefit Republicans? Because that's what they're hoping, that it will benefit them with groups that go beyond the president's normal so-called base.
Yes, I agree. This is going to benefit many of those groups. Starting next year, as he mentioned, Americans will be paying taxes under a new simplified tax code. So that means lower rates, that means a nearly double deduction standard, and the expanded child tax credit, which Marco Rubio touched on today. My only fear is that Congress, from now until elections, won't have a ton of time on their legislative calendar to enact so many changes that he still wants to proceed with, which I think he called the tax cut phase 2 plan.
I don't see that happening. I'm looking at the calendar, too, and I know he wishes that it could. But, Michael, let's say if all things are done the way they're done right now, that this is what we have of this Republican Congress, and this is what they're going to have going into the midterms. What do the markets hope to see?
I think the markets just really want the president to stay on message. I think about the president. He's going down the road on a unicycle, and he's tottering along. He makes a speech like this. He starts zooming down a hill. He's feeling good. The trouble is the Comey situation, Michael Cohen, Mueller, whatever you want to talk about. It's like someone there, the Democrat strategists are throwing jacks out into the middle of the road, trying to trip up the unicycle.
Well, he didn't take any of that bait in this speech, in these remarks. He didn't touch on Cohen.
Which is perfect. He's, you know, as I said, he should be ignoring this. This is a distraction. Let's face it, with James Comey, people's minds are made up. Either you're going to say, yes, he's a hero for trying to do this, or he's a villain for trying to do this. No one is going to be won over by the George Stephanopoulos interview or by his book. No one really cares. It's not moving anything. For the Republicans, it's a matter of saying, okay, we're staying on message. We're going to talk about stimulus, talk about phase 2 of the tax cuts. No one expects it to get done. If they got anything done in any time frame within the next, call it 12 to 16 months, it would be impressive. Now, we talked about Connor Lamb and Cory Booker. Let me just point out, Cory Booker is dealing with a situation here where these tax cuts are not as good or perhaps even detrimental to a lot of people in the blue states or historically blue states.
New Jersey,
I'll count
especially.
Pennsylvania in there, even though Trump won it. Conor Lamb won, but historically it is more of a blue state. Pretty much, with these tax cuts, when Trump is speaking to the audience that is affected by it with the blue states, he's frankly saying he doesn't care. I'm not sure how to feel about that, frankly. I'm a blue state guy, but
I'm sure
look,
he likes you
in
just
terms of
fine.
strengthening, what's that?
I'm sure he likes you just fine.
We haven't met, but don't get me started.
All right, fine.
The point is the strength. In terms of the strengths, he's playing to them.
One of the things we're seeing, Dieter, is that obviously the president is trying to say this economic engine is just starting. There was a shout out to Larry Kudlow saying that's going to lead to a boom. It might very well do that, but of course Americans going to the polls will need a little bit more evidence of that. Perhaps in a few months they will see it. But what is your sense on the numbers crunchers you talked to?
I looked at Gallup, but I mean, all of these polling companies, sometimes after the election that we went through, I'm sort of surprised that any of them are still running numbers. They have 52% disapproving of the tax cut to their bottom line, 39% approving. So that's obviously not great going into.
By the way,
midterms
then these are the same folks that had Hillary Clinton up.
Exactly.
6
That's what I'm
points.
saying. I have no idea how. Maybe we should
How that
all become
all
pollsters,
factors
right?
out.
But I do think what's interesting about what you were saying with the blue state and kind of ties into these trade issues is, and hearing that maybe we're not going to label China as a currency manipulator right now, maybe that introduces another element. In other words, maybe we're going to back off the tariffs, which could be an advantage further to some of these working class areas. And maybe later, the president is signaling he will label China, which is another tool in addition to.
Well, I think he did fire another salvo there, Kimberly, and there might be a design of that whole thing. But is he willing to fight fire with China?
He may be. I'm not so sure. I guess we'll see coming in the next, probably a couple of days. We'll see what's going on there. I just hope that the president gets what he wants as far as moving some of these IRS regulations.
If we fight China and call him a currency manipulator, and it's fair to say in the past they've certainly done that, then what? What are we looking at?
This is a series of carrots and sticks, let's face it, for the American consumer and manufacturer and for our potential trade partners. There's a reconciliation with China. Xi makes a speech where he talks about reconciliation. Right. Then we hear there's not going to be this labeling as a manipulator. Then we hear there's going to be. It's a back and forth. It's give and take. Meanwhile, in the back channels, real work is getting done. There's a method to the madness here. And if we're worried, if Trump is really worried about folks in Pennsylvania and Florida, then yes, there are going to be concessions made, and maybe the tariffs on consumer goods won't be as onerous. Maybe they won't exist at all. There's a lot of back and forth. Carrots and
there's other
sticks.
tools, as we've talked about,
Yes.
right? So you can label a country a manipulator. You can also reject or limit China's investment in our country, which I do think is happening.
And he has the advantage of the bully pulpit, President of the United States. All right, guys, thank you all very, very